Good morning and welcome to NASA's Johnson Space Center. I'm Chelsea Bayarte. Today we're here to talk about NASA's Boeing crew flight test mission and its uncrewed departure from the International Space Station later this week. For everybody here watching on NASA Plus, welcome, and for everybody in the room, thank you for braving the Houston weather today. We've got some briefers here that are going to talk about Starliner's departure. We have Steve Stitch, Program Manager for NASA's Commercial Crew Program, Dana Weigel, Program Manager for the International Space Station Program, and Anthony Varia, NASA Flight Director. We're going to hear some opening remarks for them shortly, but if you are a reporter online or on the phone and you have a question that you'd like to ask, go ahead and press *1 to enter our question queue. And if your question has already been asked, please push *2 to lower your virtual hand in our phone bridge here today. But let's kick it off with some opening remarks. Steve, take it away.
Thank you, and thanks for joining us today, and appreciate your interest in human spaceflight and the Commercial Crew Program. We want to take just a little time today as we prepare for Starliner's undock and landing on Friday to talk to you about what's been happening. It's been a busy part two to review the readiness once we made the decision to have an uncrewed undocking of Starliner. Everybody pulled go at that review, pending the operational status of the vehicle and the landing weather. And so we're proceeding toward undock and landing on Friday. Currently, we're targeting this Friday, September the 6th, 6:04 Eastern undock and a landing at the White Sands Space Harbor just after midnight at around 12:04 Eastern. That would be early, technically Saturday, September the 7th. The deorbit burn would be at about 11:17 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll land at the White Sands Space Harbor like we have on the previous two missions. This is an ascending approach. It comes up over the Baja Peninsula into the western part of Mexico, in a very rural part of Mexico, and then to New Mexico, and then into the White Sands Space Harbor. If weather prevents us from undocking on Friday, we have a backup opportunity on Tuesday, September 10th, and we really have opportunities every 4 days. So we'll have the 10th, the 14th, the 18th, and then we'll have to look at the 22nd, which would sort of coincide with a Soyuz opportunity as well. The Crew 8 Dragon vehicle has been configured to be the emergency return vehicle for Butch and Suni. We did that this past week, and on Thursday we reviewed that configuration, and the ground teams concluded everything was ready to go. We have the emergency procedures on board, and so upon Starliner's departure now, we'll have the Crew 8 vehicle be ready to return Butch and Suni in an emergency situation. For Crew 8 also, we're in the middle of doing an inspection of the vehicle. It's a routine inspection for micrometeorite orbital debris on the exterior of the TPS. That's going well. We should be able to wrap that up in the next few days. And it's been a busy time for Starliner. We've updated the mission data loads. We talked about those. There's like 7 mission data loads, 7 parameters that had to be updated, largely using all the crewed flight test flight software as is. We took that software, put it through a series of runs last week in the avionics and software integration lab at Boeing, and all that checked out really well. We've reviewed that data as well. We are going to look at doing a couple of hot fires on the way of some of the thrusters. In fact, that's going to the Starliner mission management team today. We're going to talk about maybe hot firing after we undock and after we clear what we call the approach ellipsoid around the space station. We'll go ahead and maybe hot fire a few of those thrusters, the forward thrusters and some of the aft thrusters. And really the purpose of that is to continue to learn. We've done 2 hot fires while docked, one after 10 days being docked, the other after a couple of months. And so we really want to see how the thrusters perform and what the thrust levels exactly are after we undock and fire them for a little bit. The teams have done a couple of simulations last week. There was a couple of entry and undock simulations. Those went really well. Today, the Starliner's been powered up, getting ready to return the vehicle. So we've powered up the vehicle, and it's going well. We've been watching the weather, and we'll continue to do so over the next few days. We'll have our undock -2 day weather briefing this afternoon. Right now, the winds have been looking very favorable, 7 to 10 knots, and the clouds are acceptable. We'll just have to watch some chances of rain over the mountains. If the weather looks good, tomorrow we'll close the hatch for the final time around 1:30 p.m. Eastern. And then we'll hold that final series of reviews, the Starliner mission management team and then the International Space Station mission management team. I'm personally looking very forward to getting Starliner back. We've learned a lot on this test flight. We'll continue to learn more, I'm sure, through the undock and deorbit phase. We have a lot of flight test objectives still ahead of us on the flight, and we're looking forward to getting those. The teams are ready, the landing and recovery team's ready, and I can't thank the team enough. It's been a journey to get here, and we're excited to have Starliner return, undock and return on Friday. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dana.
Thank you, Steve. And thank you all very much for being here. Appreciate the interest that you have in the Starliner mission and also in the International Space Station. As you heard from Steve, the undocking is planned for this Friday evening around 5 p.m. Central Time. We will have our ISS mission management team formal go-no-go poll tomorrow to support that undocking opportunity. Crew's been really busy this week on board. They're packing up the Starliner and they're getting it configured for the return. As you heard from Steve, last week they spent some time configuring the Crew 8 vehicle to get the cargo pallet into a configuration where we could support an emergency or contingency return of Butch and Suni. Let's see, Starliner will undock from the Harmony or Node 2 forward port. We'll do a slightly modified departure after the undocking. Shortly after undock, a command will be sent to do a breakout burn. That'll take Starliner up, over, and back behind the station. This alternate approach, or this breakout burn, is something that we have planned for, and it's something that the vehicle is capable and certified of doing. It just helps us to get Starliner away from ISS more quickly. And I think Anthony will add a little more detail on that operation when he talks. And as you heard from Steve, of course, after departure, the vehicle will continue on with its deorbit sequence, making a landing around 11 p.m. Central Time. We've got a pretty busy fall in front of us. After that, next week, we've got a Soyuz crew exchange starting with 73 Soyuz launch on September 11th. That'll bring up NASA astronaut Don Pettit. The crew will do an exchange, and then we'll return NASA astronaut Tracy Dyson on the 72S Soyuz vehicle. Towards the end of September, we'll bring up Crew 9. Once that crewed vehicle arrives, that will become the nominal and the contingency return vehicle for Butch and Suni. We'll do a normal handover between Crew 9, Crew 8. Then Crew 9 will depart, and shortly after that, we will do a relocation of the Crew 9 vehicle to free up the forward port for the SpaceX 31 cargo and research mission that is slated to launch and arrive in October. It has been a really busy and challenging summer, and I want to extend my sincerest appreciation to all the team members who have worked so hard on the Starliner mission plans, and also to the station industry, research, and international partners who have supported us, along with our changing mission plans and mission requirements. With that, I will hand it over to Anthony.
Thank you, Dana. I am the overall lead space station flight director for the undocking. There's a separate team with separate flight controllers and flight directors running Starliner systems, but we all train as a team. And so the joint NASA and Boeing flight control teams are deep into preparations for the undocking of Starliner, and I feel that the team is ready for the coming operations. Since the decision was made to undock uncrewed, we have been preparing through simulations, procedure reviews, and that's with the flight control team on the ground as well as the crew on orbit for the activities that are coming in the next few days. As noted, there are differences between an uncrewed and a crewed departure. For this departure, Starliner will do those immediate thruster burns to get up and away from ISS rather than a normal trajectory that has Starliner stay close to ISS and then head underneath. And this is all using capabilities that are built into Starliner. For all the core functions that Starliner must do to safely get away from ISS, those are capabilities that will be executed by Boeing's flight control team through their software in lieu of having a crew on board. Today, the Boeing team powered on Starliner systems and performed a variety of pre-undock activities, both on the systems and crew activities to get the capsule ready to come home. Tomorrow, Butch and Suni will review procedures as they will be the ones closing the hatches between Starliner and the space station, and this will set us up for undocking on Friday. To talk a little bit about the timeline on Friday, after configuring ISS and Starliner systems throughout the day, the Joint Flight Control Team will perform a go, no-go poll 45 minutes before undock. That'll be the go for undocking. A few minutes before undock, the Starliner team will send a command to execute the undock sequence, which will retract the hooks that are currently holding Starliner to ISS's forward docking port. Starliner will separate from ISS at 6:04 p.m. Eastern. Though all those times are approximate, we could undock a little bit later without impact. 90 seconds after undock, Starliner will start firing its forward-facing thrusters in the breakout burn, which will take Starliner forward and above ISS. From there, it'll be about 3 or 4 orbits until the deorbit burn, which Boeing is targeting for 11:17 p.m. Eastern. This will dip Starliner's orbit into our atmosphere and will allow it to land at White Sands, New Mexico, just after midnight Eastern. If for some reason the joint team decides not to undock on Friday, we have undocking opportunities on several later days, all of which are subject to weather constraints. Once we close the hatch into Starliner tomorrow, we will leave it closed no matter the undock date. And all of this is taking place atop the background of a busy as ever ISS. Shortly after hatch closure tomorrow, the space station team will be performing a reboost to set up our trajectory for the launch of next week's Soyuz mission, bringing Alexei, Ivan, and Don to the ISS. And then looking further ahead to Crew 9 at the end of the month, Nick and Alexander started their additional SpaceX training to get ready for their modified mission of 2 people coming on Crew 9 ahead of their launch later this month. And with that, I'll hand it back to Chelsea.
Thanks, Anthony. So we're going to go into our question and answer portion now. When you have a question, please state your name, affiliation, and if possible, who you want to direct your question to. I think we're going to go ahead and start right here in the room.
Gina Sinceri for Steve Stitch. I'm kind of looking for a terminology to address some of this stuff. We've seen reports, people saying they're stuck. They're stranded. How do you define Butch and Suni's status on the International Space Station?
Yeah, it's interesting. We get a lot of terminology. I mean, they, you know, in my view, they were never really, they're never stuck or stranded. They always had a way to depart the space station. And to me, when somebody is stranded, there's a location where they cannot leave. And so they had Starliner as the vehicle that they could depart from for a period of time. Now the Crew 8 is their emergency return vehicle, and when Crew 9 gets there, that will be their vehicle. That will be their return vehicle for nominal and any emergency. So they're really a part of the expedition. They've transitioned from their role as Starliner test pilots, and now they're part of the expedition working day in and day out with Dana and her team. So.
We'll take another question here in the back.
Oh, thank you. Mark Carreau with Aviation Week and Space Technology. Once Starliner undocks, how long can it operate in an automated mode?
Once Starliner undocks, you know, really it's only going to be limited by propellant, I would say. So, I mean, it could operate for days in an, if it needed to. But the plan right now, obviously, is to undock, as we talked about, at 6:04 and then land. You know, that evening, you know, some 6 hours or so later. But if it needed to loiter, it's got that capability. Really, the only limiting consumable would be the thruster, the propellant. So.
Hi, I'm Jason Miles from KHOU here in Houston. Can you talk about logistically for the 2 astronauts, you know, going from what was supposed to be a short-term mission to a longer-term mission? I saw an interesting article somewhere this week about even their fitness routines and things change along with everything else. Can you speak to how they're doing in that regard?
Sure. Let's see. Let me back up a little bit. Since we knew this was a test flight, with intention, we put them through long-duration space station training a few years ago. And so they've finished all the same training that a normal expedition crew would do. fully qualified in all of the complex areas, spacewalks, robotics, et cetera. Butch and Suni have also both done expeditions on board station, so they're very familiar with what that looks like. So we had them well prepared to move into this role. In terms of what does it look different, you're right, there are some differences between short duration and long duration crew. A lot of that is in the exercise arena. You know, if you're doing a really short duration mission, exercise is optional for the very shortest duration missions, something like an 8-day mission. When we do long duration, though, we do switch them over to a standard long duration mission. And so as they've been on board later, we have adjusted their routines. And so they're at the point now where they're doing the normal routines and exercise that we would do for long duration crew members.
We'll take some questions from our phone bridge now. We'll start with Bill Harwood with CBS News.
Yeah, thank you very much, guys. A quick one for Anthony. Do you have the burn duration in Delta V for deorbit? And for Steve Stitch, you know, the crew's not on board because, you know, NASA said there was enough uncertainty in the performance of the systems to warrant, you know, committing people to the reentry. How confident are you, and I know you polled to keep the crew on board station, but how confident are you that the Starliner is going to make a successful landing? I mean, it seems like everybody's expecting that, but yet there's no crew on board. So, you know, how do you sum up your feelings about the health and welfare of that spacecraft? Thanks.
Well, I'll take the deorbit burn question. So in terms of the Delta V, that's going to vary based on a number of factors. So I don't want to give you an exact number on that, but the burn duration is really only about a minute. So if you're used to Dragon, it's a much quicker burn than that using the big OMAC engines that we have on Starliner.
Yeah, one of the things we did assess is the thruster health relative to the reentry, and you know, we have requirements for protecting the public as well. And so, you know, we have confidence in the thrusters. We went and looked at the thruster performance. We did some extra studies on could the thrusters degrade. If they did, we have a lot of redundancy in each thruster. We have 4 thrusters. The only thruster that we're going into the deorbit burn likely to have down is what's called B1A3 in the bottom doghouse. One of the 2 aft firing thrusters there is likely not to be functional, but all the other 27 thrusters are functional. We've assessed those. We have redundancy in those thrusters. We expect to have a good deorbit burn. And once the deorbit burn happens, then the forward thrusters are used to really push the vehicle away, push the service module away, to spin it up and then do the disposal burn. So we have confidence in the vehicle. We have confidence that the deorbit burn will be executed, and we've had 2 good landings with Starliner so far, and we're expecting another one Friday.
We'll take another question from the phone bridge. We'll go to Stephen Clark with Ars Technica.
Hi, thank you. I think my question is probably for, well, whoever wants to take it, I guess. The breakout burn after separation from ISS, is that a different profile than you use for OFT2? And is it just to get the Starliner away from the station faster due to the added risk of these thruster issues that are kind of still an unknown? And secondly, any cargo you're bringing back on this mission to return on Starliner? Thanks.
Let's see, I can take the beginning of that question. I didn't hear quite the end, so we might need to come back to that. But the breakout burn versus what we did on OFT2, I have to use my hands on this one. So, you know, for Starliner on OFT2, the standard profile is for it to undock, kind of back up along what we call the V-bar, the velocity vector of the space station, and then start a burn to go up and over space station. And this is kind of a dress rehearsal for the fly-around inspection that is part of what the capabilities of the commercial crew vehicles can do for us. So it'll get to the top of station and then do a departure burn to send it down underneath station and coast underneath on the co-elliptic, as we call it, waiting for its time to deorbit. In this case, what we're doing is the breakout burn, which will be a series of 12 burns, each not very large, about 0.1 meter per second each. And that is just to take the Starliner away from station and then immediately start going up and away. And eventually it'll curve around to the top and deorbit from above station a few orbits later. And so the reasons we chose doing this breakout burn is simply it gets the vehicle away from station faster and without the crew on board able to take manual control if needed. There are just a lot less variables that we need to account for when we do the breakout burn, and allows us to get the vehicle on its trajectory home that much sooner.
Yeah, and I would add, Anthony did a really good job of describing the trajectory, but it really puts less stress on the thrusters. In other words, there's a lot fewer thruster firings. Essentially, about 30 seconds, after undock, we'll start this small series of burns using primarily the forward thrusters, not putting the stress on the aft thrusters, and it really just takes about 5 minutes or so to actually execute that whole sequence. It's actually about three minutes or so to execute the burns, and then we're able to get out of the approach ellipsoid within about 20 to 25 minutes or so. So it's a quicker way away from station, way less stress on the thrusters. And I think Dana can talk to the cargo question.
Yeah, I think the last part of your question was about cargo. We always had plans on this mission to use the extra available space and bring cargo home, so we're still doing that. I think the largest thing, just as a data point that we have on there, is one of our, we've got these rechargeable, reusable oxygen tanks. They're pretty sizable, and so we had that in the original plan. We'll keep that on the vehicle. There's a handful of other bags full of other bits and pieces, too, that will return as part of the original cargo return plan.
And Stephen, we had missed the beginning of your question here in the room. It came across a little bit muffled. If we didn't fully answer your question and you want to repeat it, please go ahead and do so at this time.
No, those are all my questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll go to Marcia Dunn with the Associated Press next.
Hi, probably for Steve. What risks are there to the space station with Starliner's departure if the thrusters go out or other malfunctions occur close in? And when the capsule is re-entering, any risk to the flight path? People on the ground? Could parts crash to Earth if the re-entry goes bad? Thanks.
Yeah, I'll start with the first part of the question. Any risk to the space station? We specifically looked at this sequence that's there in the software anyway to use it to mitigate any risk to the space station. The first thing that happens when with the hooks drive on the NASA docking system is there's a couple of springs that kind of push the vehicle away, so it will immediately have clearance. You know, we've hot-fired the thrusters. We hot-fired 27 of the 28 thrusters. It's probably been like 4 weeks ago now. The thrusters all performed well, so we expect to get the delta V we need out of those thrusters. These are what we would call short pulses, but not frequent pulses where we saw the heating before. So we really don't anticipate the same kind of effects that we saw that caused the poppet swelling. These are longer firings in general, and there's more cooling with those firings. So we don't really expect any issues with the thrusters near station. And then we get away very quickly, and once we're on that trajectory, we're safe from the space station. Really, the thrusters on the service module, the next big job they have is to hold the attitude while the big OMAX fires. Anthony said it's about a 60-second deorbit burn, and that's the critical thing that needs to happen to get the crew module on a safe trajectory to enter into the atmosphere and then land at White Sands. There's good redundancy in those thrusters, as I talked about. We've got 4 thrusters in each direction, so we expect that to go well. And then the Sept sequence again, where the crew module and service module separate, and then the service module goes into a disposal mode. Those are forward thrusters as well, which are healthy. So we anticipate a good burn, and we have a lot of redundancy, and that's what we're relying on to have a safe entry.
Our next question on the phone will be Elizabeth Howell with Space.com.
Hi, everybody. Thank you. This one, I think, is for Steve. So a couple quick questions. The first one was, do we still call it CFT after Starliner comes home in terms of Butch and Suni's mission, or are they part of Expedition 71, 72, et cetera? And then the second one is, can you talk a little bit about what you're going to be doing for evaluations after Starliner returns for the first few weeks? Thanks.
Yeah, I would say they were part of the crewed flight test, right? This vehicle and mission was very important to us, and so Butch and Suni will always be part of the crewed flight test. After we get the vehicle back, we'll go through a couple months of post-flight analysis of the trajectory, how the thrusters perform, during the final phase of flight. And then we're also already working hand in hand with Boeing to look at modifications to the system. Is there ways that we can fly the vehicle differently? Do we need to do some more thruster testing out at White Sands to fill in some of the gaps that we had perhaps in qualification? So all that's going to start taking place, and there's teams starting to look at what we do to get the vehicle fully certified in the future.
We'll now go to a question here in the room with Aviation Week.
Yes, Mark Carreau with Aviation Week and Space Technology. Thank you for the second question. I wonder if you could go into a little more detail about what you've done to prepare the Crew 8 Dragon for Butch and Suni to join the four who launched on it in case there was some emergency that you had to leave the space station with them.
You want to take that?
You go ahead and talk about the pallet.
Yeah. So what we have done is we've configured in the cargo area on Crew 8 what I would call temporary seats. So we've used some of the items on the space station to build a temporary seat for Butch and Suni. As you have seen for launch in Starliner or even Dragon, the crew needs to have their feet in a certain location, their knees bent, and so we have this temporary seat configured for Butch and Suni. It has a number of straps associated with that goes around them and secures them in place should we ever need to use it. We don't intend to ever use it, but it would be some extreme contingency where we had to get away from station quickly where they could use that. We've analyzed that from airflow perspective, and we've got good airflow down there. We know that they can get the air they need. We've practiced hand signals for communication should we need that. And we've also analyzed it for the landing and parachute event, and the loads on the body are acceptable in these temporary seats that we've configured.
Gina Sinceri, ABC News. I think this is for Dana. You've had really many long duration missions. Scott Kelly, Mark, Peggy, a number of people, Christina. How do you as an agency support those astronauts' families on the ground for these long duration missions? You've got a good program here.
We are very fortunate that we've got a great network of support for our crew members. Their families are very actively engaged in the mission. They follow along with the mission, whether it's coming to watch dynamic activities like a docking, undocking. They'll come and join us.
Yeah, possibly.
In the viewing room, in mission control. But I think some of the really important touch points, in addition to the crews having, as you know, they've got phones that they can use to call down and talk to their family. But we have so much experience with previous crew members who have flown. We have a really good support network, both in the crew office and in the operations area, supporting our crew. And we also have other behavioral health and other great support assets, both for our crew on board and for all of the family members. So pretty big support network. They're part of the NASA family.
You've got someone to mow the lawn, right?
We'll take our next question now from our phone bridge. Kristen Fisher with CNN.
Hi there. Thanks so much for doing this. My questions are for Anthony. Anthony, when you guys are doing those final go, no-go polls after Starliner's hatch has been closed, what are some things other than weather that could lead to a decision to delay Starliner's return? If you could just walk us through maybe some of those things on the technical side, I think that'd be helpful. And then finally, worst case scenario, let's just say that after the undock that those immediate thruster burns don't happen, that the thrusters don't fire. What happens in that situation? Thanks.
I'll take your second question first. As Steve alluded to, there are springs that are currently charged up and ready to go on the Starliner side of the docking port. And so as soon as the hooks release and allow the vehicles to have motion, those springs are going to push Starliner away from ISS. And in the event that the thrusters for some reason did not fire, we do have analysis that shows that the vehicle is going to push away from station and not have any sort of collision concerns. So we're good there, and we of course expect those thrusters to work for that breakout burn. In terms of the types of things we're looking at in the go, no-go ahead of the undock, it's not just the Starliner. We got to make sure that the entire ISS and all of its appendages and systems are in a good state and ready to support the backing away of Starliner, ensuring that we have good communication between the ground teams, the ISS, the Starliner, the TDRS, all of those sorts of things that we want to make sure are good to go. And we have guidance in these rules that say which types of things we can live without versus which things we would actually stop the undocking for. It's a very long rule, but our systems experts are very good at parsing through that data and being able to quickly determine, with all of their knowledge as a certified flight controller, whether their systems are ready to support or if we need to talk about it.
We'll go now to Joey Rolette with Reuters.
Hey, thank you. Quick one for Dana. There's a lot of interest in how the astronauts are doing on the ISS, and you had mentioned that they are trained and well prepared, and that they're going to be doing normal routines and exercises for a long duration mission. Can you just kind of quickly go into what that is specifically, and whether any other cargo missions are going to be needed to specifically accommodate them? And then, Steve, you had said earlier that in the weeks after Starliner's landing, you guys are going to look at potential modifications to the system, potential more testing, and filling in gaps in qualification. What are those gaps in Starliner's qualifications that you guys would want to fill? Thanks.
See, I'll start with the first one. Let's see, since Butch and Suni have been on board and they were extended, they already started participating and really helping us out on board station. They've done over 42 experiments, may actually be more than that by now. That was when I checked last week. They had over 100 hours between the two of them helping us on board with science and research. And so I would say that the change between their short duration mission and an expedition has been a lot more gradual than you might imagine, just because they've been chipping in and helping along the way. They are doing, the normal exercise regiments that have a high degree of both cardiovascular work as well as resistance training. So they're doing the standard amount that we have all crew members do at this point. So both of those have been more gradual changes, and so they're actually pretty shifted over in terms of daily routines with our expedition crew. You asked about manifest items. When we first sent them up, they were borrowing a lot of our generic clothing and some of the generic choices that we have on board. We have switched some of those things out. When we sent up the Northrop Grumman 21 flight, we put a lot of Butch and Suni's specific crew preference items, is what we call them, on board the vehicle. So they actually have all of the standard expedition gear at this point that any other crew member would be able to select. We've got another cargo vehicle coming up, SpaceX 31. We'll send up anything else that they need for the back end half of their mission on that flight.
And let's see, in terms of qualification and things we need to do after the flight, the first thing, in the helium system, obviously we have a number of helium leaks. We think these are related to a seal in the thruster flange itself. That seal, when it's exposed to oxidizer, which is the vapor from the propellant, one of the oxidizer propellants, we think that maybe it's causing a little degradation in that seal. So one of the things we're looking at is a different material on the seal and maybe a different, slightly enlarged seal to make that seal better, so that we can solve the issue with the helium leaks. So that's one thing that we'll be working on. And then the second thing really is on the thrusters. Clearly the way we fire the thrusters causes the thruster to overheat and causes this poppet on the Teflon poppet on the oxide to swell. And so we need to go understand what kinds of pulses in particular cause that swelling, the number of pulses, the pulse train itself, and what temperatures it gets to on the thruster itself. And then how do we then tell the vehicle not to fire the thruster in that manner that caused the extra heating? We also want to understand in the doghouse itself, the doghouse is trapping heat in a way that perhaps we didn't understand pre-flight. And so is there anything we can do inside the doghouse to not trap so much heat in and not expose the thrusters to the additional heating from not only their own firing, but when, for example, the OMAC fires, there's heat that crosses over into the thrusters as well. So those are some of the things we'll be working on after we get the vehicle back.
We'll go now to Eben Brown with Fox News.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for doing this. My question is, what do you do either as your teams or as an agency to decide or have confidence in, after all of this is over, the Starliner returns, to go forward with the program, to go forward with, or for Boeing to go forward to try to have a successful, fully soup to nuts, human flight with Starliner? How do those conversations go? What are you looking for? What would be acceptable to you?
Yeah, I'll start and see if Dana has anything to add. I mean, many parts of the flight went extremely well, and Starliner is a great spacecraft. We know that it performs well. The life support system's performing very well. In fact, we have extra oxygen. We're going to transfer over the next 24 hours or so about 20 pounds of oxygen to the International Space Station to use that oxygen. So many things on the vehicle are working really well. What we really need to go do is look at the things that didn't perform the way we expected. Like I talked about the helium leaks. Can we go fix those leaks, test those on the ground, and have confidence to move forward and fly again? And the same thing with the thrusters. We know the thrusters are working well when we don't command them in a manner that overheats them and gets the poppet to swell on the oxide. Many of the thrusters, we never saw any degradation at all. So we know that the thruster is a viable thruster. It's a good component. How then we not overheat it? And we just have to go look system by system as we move forward towards certification, hand in hand with the Boeing team. And we have a process that we understand very well, and we'll start to work on that as soon as the vehicle comes back.
We'll take our next question from Jeff Faust with Space News.
Hi. I wanted to follow up on an earlier question just mentioned about the thrusters for Steve Stitch. Are you looking primarily at changing the way the thrusters are used to address the overheating issue versus changes to the thrusters themselves or the doghouse's hardware changes to prevent the overheating in the first place? Thanks.
Yeah, I would say we haven't really ruled anything out yet, but an easier fix would be to not change the thruster design itself, but to try to understand the kinds of pulses we can get into where once you pulse it a number of times, after it stops pulsing, then the heat will soak back into the thruster and cause the poppet to swell. And so the easiest thing to do is figure out how do we lower the temperature that the thruster is operating at and maybe not fire it in a manner that causes it to have this overheating phenomenon. That's really the primary thing that we're focused on based on what we learned at White Sands, based on what we've learned in flight.
We'll go to our next question. Anthony with Spectrum News.
Hello. Thank you all so much for taking the time to answer our questions today. My question goes towards the future. It was planned that the Boeing Starliner 1 mission, it's crewed, it's supposed to happen sometime next year. How will what happened with this test impact that? And going forward, how will the certification process change regarding what happened with this mission? Thank you.
Yeah, as we've talked about before, we were planning at one point a flight in February of 2025. We've moved that out to the August timeframe already. Really what we need to do now, we've been entirely focused this summer on understanding what is happening on orbit, trying to decide can we bring the crew back or not. Once we decided uncrewed, now how do we safely get the vehicle undocked and landed at White Sands Space Harbor? I think what we need to do now is really lay out the overall plan, which we have not had time to do. We haven't, because the teams have been so focused on this flight, laying out that overall search strategy, the overall amount of work we've got to go do. And then when we do that, we'll have a better understanding of when can we certify the vehicle and when can we resume flights.
We'll take our next question from Micah Maidenberg with the Wall Street Journal.
Hey, good afternoon. Dana or Steve, since the last briefing, have either of you spoken with Butch and Suni? Could you give a readout on what they said, or if you haven't, what have they communicated to NASA recently about their new mission? And there was some discussion on the last briefing about disappointment at at NASA about not being able to finish CFT with crew. Have you heard any of that from either astronaut? Thanks a lot.
I'll take the first part. I've had some email exchanges with the crew, and they're happy that we made a decision. I think one of the challenges for them is kind of waiting, and they've been listening to a lot of discussions. In fact, they actually tie into a lot of Steve boards, and so they're following along. They're very much engaged, asking questions. I think they're happy that a decision was made, and they understand the plan forward. In the communications with me, they're kind of thankful and ready to move forward. I think Joe Acaba said it best when he said, they flew as test pilots. They're ready to execute whatever mission we put in front of them. They have confidence in the team. If we would have decided to bring them home, they'd be ready to come home. But we decided to leave them on board to join the expedition and do the work on board station. And so they're ready to go and execute that. I don't know if you have anything you want to
I haven't
add to that.
spoken to them other than a few emails back and forth. I mean, they seem like they're in good spirits. I would say our team, is very resilient, and I've seen the team since we made the decision a little bit more than 10 days ago, focused now on bringing the vehicle back. I mean, that's what these individuals do in human spaceflight. They are passionate about their jobs. They understand the importance now of moving on and getting the vehicle back, and getting the vehicle back safely, and making sure that the changes we've made to the mission have been accommodated. We've changed a few procedures on how the cockpit's got to be configured. Are those changes the correct ones? Looking back on what we did for OFT2, the changes in using this breakout sequence, do we have all that right? Monitoring the weather, and now they're kind of into that normal rhythm, I would say, of getting the vehicle powered up and ready to come home. And I've seen a bit of a shift in attitude, and then we're ready to go execute now, and that's really what we're focused on.
Yeah, and I'll underscore, on the flight operations side, we're talking with Butch and Suni and all of the crew all of the time. And their mission focus is really admirable. They are not just passengers on this vehicle. They're a part of the team. They were asking good questions and providing excellent context as we were trying to figure out what was going on with Starliner. You heard from Butch last month talking about how the vehicle felt on the first day, how it flew like a dream, and how it felt a little sluggish on the second day. We get a lot of telemetry and a lot of camera views and all sorts of data in human spaceflight, but the data you get from talking to a human about what they're experiencing can give you some context about what the data is showing you. And so they've been extremely valuable members of this team. And so I would say that their mission focus has been, though it's changed with the change in their mission, they are just as dedicated for the success of human spaceflight going forward.
We'll go now to Robert Perlman with Collect Space.
Thank you. Will Suni and Butch's Starliner suits be returning on Starliner? And is my understanding correct that there's only one extra SpaceX suit on station until Crew 9 arrives? So in the case of an emergency evacuation, which crew member would wear that suit?
Yeah, those are good questions, Robert. The two Boeing suits will return with Starliner. So those suits that Butch and Suni wore for the launch day and on the way to space station will return. We do have one suit on orbit right now that fits Suni, and she's tried that suit on and it fits well. That's the SpaceX suit. The suits are not compatible, so the Starliner suits would not work in Dragon and vice versa. So when we set up the contract, we let each of the contractors define their own suits and their own interface. And then we're sending up a suit for Butch that will fly up on Crew 9, and so he'll have a suit. Right now, the way the Dragon is configured, for an emergency, the Butch and Suni riding on the cargo pallet in those temporary seats that I described, that's an unsuited configuration. So there's no spacesuits that work there. The Dragon's configured to support four suits and 4 people with suits. And so in a temporary situation, we would not have suits for Butch and Suni on Dragon. So, until Crew 9 gets there. And then Crew 9, it becomes a normal vehicle where they would have suits and seats, and they're part of that Crew 9 crew returning home.
We'll take a question now from Irene Klotz with Aviation Week.
Thanks. I have 3 quick for Steve. You mentioned 20 to 25 minutes for Starliner to leave the approach ellipsoid. How much time would that have been under the nominal departure with the crew? And the other question, you mentioned about a test of thrusters after it's out of the approach zone. Are you planning on testing the thrusters that failed, were selected off on approach, or another one? And just lastly, is there any reason why you can't release a picture of the temporary seats in the Crew 8 pallet? Thanks.
Okay, I think there was 3 questions there. Anthony may be best to answer the first one. I don't remember how long the original undock sequence took to get out of the ellipsoid. Maybe Anthony might remember.
Yeah, to get out of the ellipsoid, I think it's under an hour, but there's going to be a plus or minus on that. But it's around that time frame, if I'm remembering correctly.
And then the second question was relative to the thrusters and hot fires. The team is still analyzing which thrusters they would like to hot fire. I suspect they will choose to hot fire some of the aft thrusters. They may choose to hot fire the B1A3 thruster just to see. What we saw is, we did 2 docked hot fires, one about 10 days after docking and one a couple months later, and we saw that poppet receded quite a bit, and so the thrusters had a lot more thrust. So the purpose of the hot fires will be to see what has changed in the thrusters in the time frame since then. In fact, B1A3 we never hot fired at all. And then also to check the thrusters, the forward thrusters. They may hot fire a few of those, and that will be the purpose of that, is to see after you undock and you fire them for a little while, did we see anything in terms of a degradation in thrust there? And then the aft ones, just to collect a little bit more data on those thrusters. It really all is oriented toward learning more about the thrusters, and then what can we do to mitigate the heat in the thrusters in the future.
We'll take a question now from Jim Siegel with Florida Media Now.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for taking my call. A question about, let me get my notes here. Will there be instrumentation on board to record what the crew would have experienced if they had been on board during the return of the Starliner? Thank you.
Yeah, good question. Absolutely. There is a wide range of instrumentation on the vehicle. In particular, on the seats, there are accelerometers that measure the forces that the crew would feel, and so we'll have that data. We'll have a wealth of data on the spacecraft itself, the telemetry system, pressures, temperatures, structural measurements across the vehicle. So we're going to get a lot of data on the return. In particular, even inside the crew cabin, we can get a lot of data that will help us for the next flight as well.
We'll go now to a question from AFP.
Thank you so much for doing this. I just wanted to know, maybe from Steve, first of all, I think it was to follow up from another question. Do you have a calculation for the chance of a catastrophe for this return flight? And a little follow-up question. I just wanted to understand the trade-offs better with regards to the breakout burn. You said it's less stressful for the thrusters, it's quicker, and so on and so on. So why do you ever not do a breakout burn when you have crew? I know that crew are able to manually pilot, but is there a disadvantage to breakout burns that means you don't normally do them? Thank you.
Yeah, I would say the thing we looked at very carefully is what to do with the separation sequence. Do we go with the normal sequence where we could get a little bit more data on how the navigation system performs as it flies around the space station? We do have one of our requirements is to be able to fly around the space station, which we've done a few times with Dragon, just to characterize the exterior surface of the space station and see if there's anything that we can learn about the space station. So the original purpose was to do that part of that trajectory, part of that fly around. When we looked at the performance of the thrusters and improved our understanding over the last few weeks We chose to go with a simpler sequence to get away from station a little faster and then not really put the station at any risk if you had thruster failures. Obviously, you saw on approach, we had 5 different thruster fail-offs, which we were able to recover each of those thrusters. We were able to have good control of the vehicle during all those various timeframes on the approach. It just took that whole strategy out of the equation by going with this very simple sequence, which was already a part of the software. And so the Boeing team did an innovative job of choosing that sequence, and that's what we're going to go fly. I'm not sure I copied the first question, but maybe Dana did. What was the first question?
Along the lines of uncrewed versus crewed.
Oh, uncrewed versus crewed. You know, it was a tough decision to make. You know, there really is, it was really hard to determine whether to be uncrewed or not. I would say the teams were very split in the uncertainty relative to the thrusters. And so, you know, the NASA team chose to return Butch and Suni on Dragon.
We'll go to our next question from David Denault with About Space Today.
My question is for Steve. At our last briefing and what you've just said about the meeting between Boeing and NASA, and after the briefing, several people have come forward and said it was kind of a very heated meeting, almost a shouting match, and Boeing's insistence in saying their spacecraft is safe for astronauts. Could you comment on that and kind of bring this to an end?
Yeah, I would say the last meeting we had where we talked detailed technical data on the different positions and the different analyses, I would not characterize it as heated. I would say anytime you're in a meeting of this magnitude where there's this kind of decision, there is some tension in the room. Boeing believed in the model that they had created that tried to predict thruster degradation for the rest of the flight. I would say the NASA team looked at the model and saw some limitations, and it really had to do with, do we have confidence in the thrusters and how much we could predict their degradation from undock through the deorbit burn? And the NASA team, due to the uncertainty in the modeling, could not get comfortable with that. And so I wouldn't say it was a yelling, screaming kind of meeting. It was a tense technical discussion where we had both sides listening intently to all the data, and in the end, to make a decision whether to return crewed or uncrewed. And NASA chose to allow Butch and Suni to stay on station, return on Crew 9, and we'll bring the vehicle back uncrewed on Friday.
I think I would just like to add one thing to that. You know, from a Boeing standpoint, they certainly know their spacecraft, and they're analyzing risks and what they think the capability is with the Starliner vehicle. But Boeing is not in a position, and it would be unfair of them to ask or weigh into a risk versus risk trade for the scenario that NASA was weighing, which was bringing them home in the Starliner crewed or coming up with an alternate plan using Crew 9 and having them be part of the expedition. And so I think you also have to recognize that the agency is in a bit of a different position in terms of our understanding about the risks and what's available to us without Starliner. So that's also a reason for a difference in the opinions. And Boeing even stated that as part of the review last week, acknowledging that that part is really in NASA's hands in terms of making that trade. They can't weigh in on that part of the trade for the agency.
We'll go now to Ken Kramer with Space Up Close.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. A lot of good information. I want to go back to the hot fires, please. Been wondering about this for a while. Why did you not do more hot fire tests in the orbit when you were still while you're still docked? And can you also please describe these pulses? How intense will these pulses be? The same as the hot fire test after it undocks, or will they be longer? And then finally, Steve, you mentioned about changing the pulsing of the thrusters on the ground and hoping that would be sufficient. I'm just wondering if you maybe shouldn't be a little bit more proactive in dissipating the heat and not just try to change the pulses of the thrusters to minimize the heat.
Hey, issues with your audio here. We were able to catch a couple of the questions in there. I got, why did you not do more hot fire tests while you were still docked? And then we also caught, will the ones after undocking be longer?
Yeah.
Okay. The last question was when you do the ground testing, okay, you mentioned that you're just going to change to pulsing. Why not be more proactive in trying to dissipate the heat in a redesign? Thank you.
I caught about being more proactive.
Yeah, I think I'll try. Let me see if I caught it. The comm was a bit garbled. So the first question was related to why didn't we do additional hot fire tests while docked? I think, first of all, there was a downside to doing the test. Every time we ended up needing to do a hot fire test, we used a little bit of the helium, and we used some of our helium margin. So we did one early on to try to understand the aft thrusters. What were we seeing on those? And we actually perfected and came up with a great system using the space station. Dana's team did a wonderful job of being able to back out an estimate of the thrust, considering the station weighs about 1 million pounds, to use the navigation system on the station to back up thrust. That was important to us. The second one we did, and about 2 months after being docked, we tested all the thrusters, and that was important to understand the recovery of the poppet. And we think, based on that testing, the poppet had recovered almost 100%. All the thrusters that we tested were almost back to the normal levels of thrust. So we didn't really see a need to do more docked hot fire testing after that. The ones we will do undocked, we will do a real short pulse, about of 1/10 of a second pulse on the thrusters. And you don't need as long a firing, because what we'll do is put the vehicle in free drift. In other words, there'll be no other firings. And so when that thruster fires, we know for a nominal thrust about how much the vehicle should respond to it. And so we'll do these real short pulses. And then on the ground, we're looking at, in terms of the ground testing, we want to understand the kinds of pulses that cause the heating, but then we will look at ways inside the doghouse. Is there ways that we can dissipate the heat? Is there ways that we can maybe cool the thrusters? There's a whole wide range of options we'll look at for making the thrusters operate in a manner where they're not susceptible to the heating.
All right, we're running low on time, but we will go to David Curley with Full Throttle. Take it away.
I have a scratchy connection too. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, we hear you loud and clear.
Excellent, thank you. Steve Stitch, quick question. You've talked about this. Can you describe the profile of using the thrusters after undocking? Are you trying to push them? You're trying to keep them below what you normally do? And bigger picture, have you noticed a difference between the way the computer flies with the thrusters versus the way a human flies with the thrusters?
Yeah, the overall plan for undocking is to minimize, I would say, the use of the thrusters in that undock sequence, like we talked about. Essentially, once we open the hooks, the springs will push the vehicle, Starliner, away. Then we'll do some real short thruster firings to put us on a trajectory that Anthony described really well. It'll take us above the station and behind, and we'll be opening to a nice range to where we can execute the deorbit burn. And then after that, we really are going to just stay in some very benign attitudes and not fire the thrusters very much at all. And then the next time they really get used is the deorbit burn, and we'll what they're used for there is to point the vehicle. In other words, to do the deorbit burn, we need to point the OMAC engines into the direction of travel. And so there's 4 of those OMACs. We'll point those in that direction to execute the retrograde burn we need to bring the vehicle back. Those thrusters will be used to hold the attitude, and we're going to let those thrusters fire however they need to hold that attitude. And then afterwards, we flip the vehicle around and then execute a series of thruster firings with the forward thrusters to back away. The service module and crew module back away. The service module backs away. Then it spins up and does a disposal burn, and those are all done with the forward thrusters on the service module. And so, early on, we're going to kind of, be judicious with the thruster firings in close, and then sort of save the thrusters for the very end of the flight when we need them the most at the deorbit burn.
Thank you, Steve, and to all of our briefers today. This is the end of our coverage here today, but we will be back on the air Friday, September 6th, 4:45 p.m. Central Time, 5:45 p.m. Eastern, for our undocking coverage of the Starliner spacecraft. We'll be back at 9:50 p.m. Central for the deorbit through landing coverage, and then we'll have a news conference Saturday morning to follow. Until then, we'll see you then. Thanks so much for joining.